pollutants we like to focus on, they change because we cannot focus on the same ones we thought are the most important ones 10 years ago. It's interesting to research the unknown. You would think it's simple, right? You just take a sample, you grab it, you go to the lab, and then you look at what you find and you're happy. But it's not that simple. It's taken 40 years and we're still doing the same thing. Hello? If we want to have effective policies, regulations, if we want to improve our systems, then I think we should base our decision on a holistic, integrated view of the entire system.
That is Lena Mutzner, group leader at the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology, Airbag. Lena specializes in quantifying organic contaminants in urban stormwater, grey and blue-green infrastructure systems using novel measurement techniques such as passive samplers. She has been actively pursuing a better understanding of a seemingly endless and growing list of contaminants of emerging concern, developing measurement and modeling methods to help quantify and mitigate their adverse effects in support of better and healthier environments for humans, ecology, and our waterways. My name is Peter Marcus-Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges Podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to tackle the global challenges that our world is facing in their own unique ways. We reflect on the many out-of-the-box ways our guests have navigated the complexity and intricacies of the environment at the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. On today's show, Lena and I delve into the time and space complexity of environmental water quality and go deep on how different methods of measurement and modeling can yield valuable insights to better manage several common pollutants that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. We critically reflect on the repetition cycles in water quality research and discuss how she is embracing holistic approaches to tackle this ongoing challenge. Detailed information is provided in the show notes over at peterandbach.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the show.
We should do a meditation before we even start.
We should do a meditation before we even start. Well, we haven't done a meditation in years.
I know.
It's been ages, but I do like my meditation. Maybe not as habitual as I'd like it to be, although we've had Marshall a few episodes ago tell us all about the benefits of it. So what has meditation been like for you?
I guess I have not been actively following meditation as we used to, but I like to bike. Like I bike to work and it takes me 30 minutes and it's a little meditative.
They say when you're in the gym or you're doing exercise, you do find your attention in your muscles that are propelling you forward, I guess, or lifting the weights.
Yes, especially if it's boring things to do. Like biking is almost a little too interesting, but it's still like if you do it every day and you do the same cycle path, then you come to work and you already have some kind of stillness of mind.
Interesting.
And I guess I do it because there's not much time, or I don't take enough time for meditating like I used to. So cycling can be a replacement. And then there is deherbing. Do you call it deherbing?
Deherbing.
I'm not sure. Like you have all these weeds, de-weeding. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Clearing your garden of weeds or clearing your...
Yes. Yeah. This can be very meditative if you have a lot of weeds growing that you don't want. And then it's like you're just like picking these weeds.
Well, I would think something similar is cooking when you're chopping a carrot.
But it's so short. How can you meditate on chopping a carrot?
Well, you chop many carrots and potatoes and every other thing you put into your dish. I don't know.
So you are eating a lot of vegetables?
Well, they say it's healthy, balanced diet. You can do the same with meat. Either way, I'm sure we'll revisit that topic in due course. But welcome to the show, Lena.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
And it's quite interesting, the sequence of guests, because we've just had someone from a Nordic country. You are Swiss, but you also tend to visit Nordic countries a lot. At least when I first met you, it was a very common thing of you to just jump on a train on a weekend and head up to Sweden, I believe it is.
Yes, that's true. My mom lives in Sweden.
So what's your comparison? Switzerland, Nordic countries? What's your preference? How does it compare the two?
So I also lived in Copenhagen and I did my postdoc there. So I know a lot about Denmark and a lot about Sweden. And there are many things I love, like long summers. They're just so beautiful. The landscape, I mean, Switzerland is just crowded. I hate it.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
You don't find it crowded?
Crowded with mountains or crowded with people?
Crowded with people.
As well?
Like the urban landscape. Like if you just go around in Switzerland, you notice that there is buildings everywhere. There's like concrete everywhere. There is no nature except the mountains.
Okay, I guess density. So
Yes, it's very dense. So that's what I call crowded. So that I love about the northern countries, especially Sweden. There is so much green space. However, as you already mentioned, it's very flat. So I don't like that.
So that makes me think the cycling route that you take every morning from our previous discussion is quite hilly and therefore more interesting.
Actually, it's not even true. It's all flat because it's a little sad, right? We live in a very flat area of Switzerland. For Switzerland, this area is really flat, I would say so. Yeah, that's a little disappointing seen from this perspective. Apart from this, what I really don't appreciate about northern countries is the winter.
Ah, yes.
It's so long and dark and gray and rainy and cold. I mean, it could be good for your work, I guess, if you're not too depressed.
I think there's still the magic to the Nordic winters, right? Because you got the Northern Lights, you have Christmas in full swing because you have Christmas lights 24/7. You can drink mulled wine to your heart's content, even at 6 a.m. in the morning, right?
Yes, I'm thinking about what you're saying is true or not. Because all of those things you can do in Switzerland too. Because we also have very nice, cold, snowy winters. Because actually in Copenhagen, it almost never snows.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's somehow too wet, I think. And so it's cold, but not cold enough. So no romantic snow. Like I think we have more snow in Switzerland. And the gray really gets to you.
Okay.
Yeah, so
not exactly travel advertising, but maybe it's more for getting people to come to Switzerland.
Yeah, that's true, I guess.
Either way, long time coming, and glad we can finally sit down and have a chat a bit about what you've been up to in pretty much the last few years on a topic that we've featured a few times on the show, but something that we can dive really deep in now, having you here. And we'll be doing it in English. I know that you have a sort of good multilingual background, but you certainly do not like speaking High German. And I think we ended up defaulting to English when I first arrived in Switzerland. So I think we'll stick to English for the show as well today.
Yes, I'm not disappointed. Although, Peter, I know, you speak High German, and I always thought we should stick to German, given that it's our common tongue, right? But no. I'm happy with English. Thank you.
All good. So you are in the field of water quality. What's your mission there? Tell me.
Oh, yes. Of course, I think water quality is the most important challenge to tackle in the world. And I'm laughing a little bit because I think there's many challenges we need to tackle. But I think if you're a researcher, you always think that your topic is like the biggest challenge ever to be tackled. And there's so many open questions and we will never answer them all. So yes, but truly my motivation is that I think water pollution is a very important issue that affects us all. Right. So I think, yes, for me, it's a big topic.
Yeah. I suppose that's also how I started my research career, stormwater quality. It was actually trying to quantify or better understand this phenomenon that we call the first flush.
True. You made a paper on it. I think I read it.
Yeah.
And didn't you prove that there is a first flush?
Well, we had a different method for trying to sort of determine whether there's a first flush. And so the idea is that when it rains and the water comes off the catchment and into your drains, that first part is often the most polluted. So for those who are unfamiliar with the concept. And there's been many ways to try and assess it. And this is something I'm looking forward to getting into with you, how we actually get the data to try and figure out these things. And we came up with a method that could sort of assess it by slicing up your data set and trying to see if there's really an increased first, more polluted section of water that comes off the roads and, into your drains.
And what was the result?
I think like everyone, it's always case-based. So
yes.
In some cases, yes. For some types of pollutants, yes. And in other cases, no. It's been this mythical phenomenon that I think many laugh about and many always come back to every 10 years. It's like a trend.
It is a true trend. And I think it's actually an important one because if there would be such a first flush behavior, right, and we would know how to treat this polluted water. But as you said, it's like been researched for many years. And now again, there has been research on it. Actually, we did also recent research at EAVAG, where it was more about the dissolved part of the very emerging contaminants, looking at how they behave during an event.
And that's in a way where you are in a much more advanced level than me. I looked at simple, sediment or suspended solids, as they call it, and nutrients, but you're into the real nasties. And we've only covered, these kinds of pollutants or a whole group of them once previously on the show in episode 34 with Denise Metrano, who told us a bit about microplastics. But she also mentioned that term pollutants of emerging concern or contaminants of emerging concern, which you're very much in the foray.
Yes, it's true, though I might have to come back to what you just said, because it's not really true that, or we don't know if these pollutants are more nasty than what you said, the simple solids or the heavy metals, right? Or even the nutrients there can be really, really toxic. It's just that there's more data on it. And it's interesting to research the unknown.
Yeah. So I guess to sort of ease into that topic, I want to go back into the past and sort of ask you what interested you into getting into this topic in the first place? Like, why engineering? Why water quality? Why these kinds of pollutants?
Okay, so first you might want to know why engineering.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a challenging question. I mean, there's many answers to it, but I wanted to become a psychiatrist. This is how you call it.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in people and how they behave. This is why I'm an engineer now.
Okay.
It makes total sense.
Logical conclusion.
No, not really. But then I back when I decided what to study, I realized there's so many people that want to do this. I cannot really earn a lot. That was actually my reasoning at that time. And then I thought, but engineers, I mean, they always have good job opportunities. And then I thought, but I still want to do something that is very relevant to people and to human health. So then I found this environmental engineering and I thought, this is perfect. I will earn a lot of money. It's actually not happened. And I will help people, which also hasn't happened yet. But I guess it's still really nice because we focus on help in increments the environment, which I really like. So this is how I became an engineer, opportunity driven, I guess.
Yeah. But I guess with that noble mission to try and help people, I guess money aside, that's always a concern in the back of our heads.
Yes, it's true.
Either way, so environmental engineering and water quality, because I guess public health concerns, that's something I guess you also see firsthand because you like to be in the outdoors, you like to go hiking, and you like to see nature for what it is, and protecting that as well, I guess must have also influenced a lot of your choices.
Yes, maybe in hindsight, you would explain things like this. You would say, this all makes sense why I'm looking at water quality, because you're right. It really is an important aspect for human health. But as we know, this is often not how studies work and how decisions work. So again, it was rather opportunity driven.
Yeah.
Maybe I wanted to do something that matters for the real world. I said, I want to research a little bit, but I want some project that is really relevant. And at that time, they actually just started to upgrade the wastewater treatment plants in Switzerland.
Yeah.
It was a new topic, and micropollutants, emerging contaminants, right, should be removed from wastewater treatment plants. And then the question came up, how about all these untreated overflows? Do they matter for the aquatic environment? And this is why I got into this research, because it was really a topic it's still an important topic, but back then it was really new.
Yeah. And I guess for those who are, still new to urban drainage, listening in to get a bit more of a sense there, we have our centralized systems often, we collect the wastewater. And in some countries, we also collect the rainwater or stormwater in the same pipe, and that gets pumped to the wastewater treatment plant. Problem with trying to centralize this is you often end up with the pipes overflowing when it rains too much. And so these overflows, as you've mentioned, will then just spill that mix of wastewater and rainwater into the nearest river. And that, of course, comes with it all these pollutants that don't get removed. And the consequences, of course, I guess you can imagine, on the one side, it hurts the ecosystem. On the other side, it can also be a public health risk to people. So management has typically been focused on trying to minimize these spills, or I guess where you can, to start to decouple these kinds of systems as well. Did I sort of summarize that infrastructure in a short and concise way. What do you think?
I think you summarized it very well. Maybe the only thing you didn't mention is the wastewater treatment plants, and that most wastewater treatment plants nowadays still don't remove these pollutants, and it's something that is still ongoing to design systems or wastewater treatment plants that remove it. But that's not really part of my research, right?
Yeah.
But it's important to understand the entire system.
That is true. And holistic understanding, we've seen this pop up in many other topic areas, in urban drainage especially. I think when you can understand the interactions across the entire system, you often manage, the issues a lot better. But you also point out that interesting fact that not all wastewater treatment plants can remove these pollutants yet. I guess that's also been a historical thing. We designed these systems to treat different contaminants. And it seems that, and we've had this mentioned several times in the past, that every few years, a new pollutant seems to catch the attention of everyone. And all of a sudden, we start to understand that a bit more. We began with, sediments and nutrients because we could see what would happen. And then we started to realize, well, actually bacteria are also a big issue. Then, heavy metals, hydrocarbons, and that list just goes on and keeps growing. I think now it's currently PFAS.
Yes, for example, PFAS or Tyre leachates are also of growing interest. Right before it was maybe Tyre particles, but now it's the leachates.
Uh-huh.
And there is an ever-growing, really enormous list of pollutants that we should look out for. There's also persistent mobile toxic pollutant groups that are really on the forefront of research interest now. All these pollutants just make it really challenging. As you said, we started really easy, maybe, if you can call it easy. Let's remove some sediments, some particles. And now we moved into this enormous group of pollutants that are very diverse. And how can we remove them? Are they an issue? It's a very interesting challenge.
No, definitely. And I guess you're encountering this list on a daily basis. And I guess as a researcher, you would also have to focus on a few key pollutants. And so large sort of area that I'd like to unpack with you now, step by step. Maybe let's start with, I guess, understanding water quality in the first place. I mean, when we look at an area or at a river and we need to actually get information about water quality, how do we go about it normally? We have to do sampling, but that can come in many forms.
Yes. You can do sampling. So that's maybe the most traditional way how you look at water quality. You just go out there and then you have many ways how you take the sample. But let's say you just take like a glass.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to your lab and you analyze this glass of water with your advanced or not so advanced techniques for all these pollutants that we already mentioned. Like you can analyze sediments in it. You can analyze nutrients, heavy metals, microplastics, and also obviously emerging contaminants, and the techniques getting more involved in the laboratory. And it's really complex, right? This is like the easiest way to do and still complicated way to take a sample. But then you could also install a sensor, for example, that will give you a very specific information about an indicator for water quality, like turbidity, which is an indicator for your sediments. So you can use all these sensors to get some idea, like temperature even, on your water quality. And if you think about this one glass of sample you took, right?
Which we call a grab sample, right?
Yes.
Because you're just grabbing it. You're sticking the glass into the water and you're just pulling out that sample.
Exactly. It's a grab sample.
Yeah.
But then you would have to think about, is what you find in the water, is this water quality actually constant?
Yeah.
And this is not the case usually. Like in a river, or even like I'm doing urban drainage research, like in this urban drainage system, this varies within a minute.
Yeah, and also across space as well. I mean, the river is not just as big as the glass. It's often massive and flowing everywhere.
Exactly, right? Different locations will have different water quality, and different points will have different water quality. So if you just take your grab sample, your one glass, and you take it to the lab, you will have next to no information.
One measurement.
Yes.
I mean, you have your measurement, but it may say nothing.
Exactly.
Okay.
It probably says nothing. It might tell you, I have very bad water quality, but it could be that this is a very unique time point and not representative. I mean, you have to assume it's not representative of what you find in there. And that makes it like a whole field. How do we do this?
Yeah.
This sampling. How can we get the best information, and maybe also thinking about how good does the information need to be to make a decision.
Yeah. And that's where that continuous method you mentioned can come into play, because now rather than just one point or one measurement, we can start to get measurements every, say, minute, right? Or every 5 minutes.
Yes. For some indicators, how I call them, these are only indicators for pollutants.
Mm-hmm.
These online sensors, they can give you some signal.
Yeah.
And this they can do in high resolution, but this is not the typical way how we collect data on emerging contaminants.
Yeah.
Because we cannot measure them with these kind of online sensors. So we have to have what we call automated samplers.
Yeah.
And these are samplers then that will sample, for example, a little piece of water, like 50 milliliters, let's say, every 2 minutes. And then we collect this over an hour or over a day or over a week. And then we analyze the water quality. Then we take it to the lab again.
So you have these auto samplers. So imagine the hand, but now powered by a robot. And who knows, with AI, they could look really cool in future. But they grab the samples, either individual ones over a certain period of time, or I guess you also sort of collect little bits of water samples and sort of mix it together in what you call a composite sample to get an average over time.
Yes, this is what's usually done, because then the analysis is really expensive, right?
Yeah.
So usually you mix them all together and then you say, oh, we have a very good water quality. We might have an issue here because we found something. This is how we do it. But then we have not resolved the issue of space, right? We only have resolved the issue of time.
True.
So the next challenge awaits us. How can we now put these automated samplers now everywhere in our catchment, everywhere in our river? I mean, we can't.
But a lot of these spatial questions is also what you've then tackled as part of your PhD, which you did at ERWAG, and then sort of continued looking into and are still looking into now, which really shows just how complex this field is.
Yes, and you would think it's simple, right? You just take a sample, you grab it, you go to the lab, and then you look at what you find, and you're happy. But it's not that simple.
No.
And even if you sample one location and you do it really well, then you will end up in the same situation. Wow, but now I know this location is really bad. But how about the entire watershed or the entire urban catchment? Is it really an issue?
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. In my PhD, I did a lot of research on passive sampling to resolve part of this issue. Like we could then spread to more locations with these passive samplers.
And passive samplers to sort of complete the list of our sampling techniques 101. Well, we've covered grab, continuous, we've covered composite, the auto sampling, and passive samplers are yet another type. Describe to me, what are these kinds of passive sampling devices? I also read that they're very useful, particularly in remote areas, because it's not a case of you have to go there every time. You can sort of go there, leave it, and come back days later.
Yes, or areas where you could have vandalism too. So I sometimes call them like a kind of fish, which is a very simplified image. But you could imagine that it's some receiving vase, so some body that then takes up these pollutants, specific pollutants that we are interested in, right?
Like a sponge.
Kind of like a sponge.
Okay.
Yeah, you could call it a sponge.
A spongy fish.
Yes, like because a fish, right, he's in the water and he's exposed to all these pollutants. And some of them will go into him or attach. And this is what we like to know. And specifically now, these passive samplers, they're very specific for a certain group of pollutants. And then we use this sponge, how you called it, this receiving phase, to collect these pollutants. And we expose our sponge for a certain time, like let's say a week. And then we go to the lab and we see what's on it. And the good thing about it, as you said, you don't have to be there. You don't need electricity. You don't need a lot of maintenance. And you can spread it wider because it's cheaper. The issue with it is you will get some number of what you collected over this week. And then you have to find out how representative this number is for what you saw or what this sponge saw over the entire week. And again, you can put a lot of research into this, like understanding how each individual pollutant, like how will a PFAS go on this sponge? Or how will a pesticide go on this sponge? Right.
So you're solving essentially the spatial issue, but at the trade-off of time, because you can't really distinguish how that sort of changed over time.
Yes, we don't see the variability over time. What's a little bit the hope is that the uptake of these pollutants is very, we call it like linear. So there's always, if you have a high concentration, a high pollutant load in your water, then you will have more going on your face. So in the end, you get some kind of mean concentration over the entire time you exposed it, which is really good, right? It's like a composite water sample in the best case.
I guess they say, having some information is better than no information at all. So knowing what levels you can expect in a particular region of your catchments will be better than not knowing that at all, because then you can start to, I guess, think of where this is coming from. If you said pesticides, so often you would then start relating this to the activities there, so agriculture or maybe urban farming or urban gardening as well. And with that information, I guess you can then design much more detailed campaigns to investigate that further, which I think has also been oftentimes the rationale for why you do this work in the first place.
Yes, you're right. Because then if you can identify hotspots where you are probably having a problem, then with these hotspots, you could go and investigate. You could put your autosampler there, or you could even really look into the problem. So that's a little bit the motivation behind using these passive samplers.
So an interesting array of sampling techniques. I guess the trade-off space and time, that's often, a tricky one. And I admire people who study water quality because, when you think about the logistics of it, the planning of the campaigns, then trying to figure out or making sense of the data that you get, that is a whole piece of work, and then let alone the expenses to plan such campaigns to get good data. So it's definitely not an easy task, but that's the one side of it, getting the data. The other side of it is what kind of data to get in the first place. So that brings us back to our contaminants. You've mentioned that this keeps growing. We're at like hundreds. But what are some of your key contaminants that you like to focus on?
That's also a very good question, because it changes. As you just said, the field evolves, and then the pollutants we like to focus on, they change, because we cannot focus on the same ones we thought are the most important ones 10 years ago. And it's really gotten challenging. Actually, I'm just supervising a doctoral student, and she is trying to make a list of pollutants that she will focus on in her work. And her goal is to identify how and which pollutants are removed in blue-green systems, like in bioretention cells. And then you have to find some very relevant pollutants that are very toxic, for example. They should be somehow a problem. They should occur a lot, else why would you study them, right? So you have this criteria for your selection, but the data is scarce and very distributed. So if you want to find out just in Europe what have people actually measured to get just a really good foundation for making your decision, let's say I want to measure 30 pollutants, right? In your lab, you want to measure 30 pollutants. You can spend weeks on selecting these 30 pollutants. But your question was a little higher level. What groups do I think are interesting right now? And I think it's from a more practical point of view, if we are engineers, we are not so interested in measuring all 30,000, 60,000 pollutants that could be out there. We want pollutants that are indicators, for example, for certain sources, for urban sources. So pollutants that tell us streets, they are a problem, right? So we select mostly, for example, I'm interested in Tyre leachates. This is an indicator for streets. And then you select one that is toxic and has a high occurrence. So I'm interested in Tyre leachates. Then there is biocides, which is really interesting also because it's used in housing, building material, and it's a good indicator for the buildings, and they are often problematic. Then a really new topic that is an old topic is PFAS, because it has been around forever, and we all, it was known that it's problematic. But in urban stormwater, in what washes off with rainwater from urban surfaces, there is some data, but not so much yet. And so we are also interested in how many of those do occur. Is it an issue, for example?
So they sort of appear on the radar, but they're sort of ignored for a bit until new understanding tells us we should worry about them.
Sometimes people worried about them 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Tyre were pollutants. It was an issue years ago already. Now we just have a new group of pollutants. But it was always known that street runoff is problematic.
Tyre is an interesting one. In Switzerland, it's regarded as the largest source of microplastics. And often it's not necessarily the plastics that are concern necessarily, because these particles, they get caught by the roadside, by the verges or the curbs. It's actually what leaches from them. And I believe in the past, zinc was always a key concern coming from tires. Not always indicative of road pollution, because it could come from many places. But I guess now, and this is one of the pollutants you like to focus on. It's 6-ppd quinone. That's what they call it.
Yes, it's one of these. There are other ones, but this is one that has really emerged, I guess, in the last, what was it, 4 years?
Yeah.
And it's because a research showed that this really occurs in tire wear, and it leaches from tire wear, and it can be very toxic to certain salmon species. Now we don't have these salmon species in Switzerland, but still, this is really an emerging topic. And as you said, it's very interesting because zinc, yes, it's problematic, and yes, it leaches from tires, but we find it everywhere.
Yeah.
And then these tire wear leaches are also interesting for engineers because they could be really an indicator of a certain behavior.
And I guess these proxy indicators will then allow you to bring it back to source, as you mentioned, the streets in this case. I know in public health studies with microbiology, they look for certain types of bacteria or indicator bacteria to then relate it back either to human waste or animal waste or animal contamination. So I guess that's where the strategy of choice comes in. And I guess with 6-ppd, you mentioned rightly the study with salmon, coho salmon, actually, to be exact. It was a paper published roughly 4 years ago, I think, which gained a lot of attention. I think people then tried to replicate it with other fish species, and they found no toxicity. So again, we're in this kind of twilight zone. Is it toxic? Is it not? Is it of concern? Is it not? I mean, how do you navigate this disagreement? And
this uncertainty. We have it a lot. We have many pollutants that we can measure or find, and we don't know the ecotoxicological threshold. So we don't know if it's a problem, yes or no. And I guess often it's a preventive mode, right? You think about, it occurs a lot. And then I'm not an ecotoxicologist. And then I hope that some other people will do studies about thresholds. And I'm more concerned about, can we sample it? What do we find? And then really this occurrence data, finding just how much do we have and estimating the potential exposure. And someone else has then to see what's the potential threshold. And it's frustrating. Honestly, it's frustrating because, we always have these pollutants that we don't know if they're problematic. And we could measure so many of them, but if you don't have a threshold, if you don't know if it's a problem, then what do you do? So 6-ppd quinone is a very prominent example because everyone has started to measure it and research it. And is it the biggest problem we have? Should we invest so much time specifically in it? And I have to say we include it, of course, in every study right now because I'm studying stormwater, urban runoff, and as it's potentially problematic and it comes from a very specific source, it's very interesting. And only the future will tell us if it was the best choice. But I guess, and this sort of became clear through one of the studies you wrote, which was looking at 10 years of micropollutant measurements, is that in a way, with these studies, if they start to consider these pollutants, at the end, it's building up, in a way, a knowledge base. Even if that's not the focus, even if they're just doing it because everyone else is doing it, you're still building up, I guess, a global database or a global knowledge base around that pollutant to better understand it at the end, right? Yes, that would be a dream if it would be like this. And yes, in theory, you're right. We need this because, as you said before, going to the field and sampling something is so time consuming. It takes so much time, so much effort. And then analyzing these pollutants, we can do only a selected few. So we need a lot of people doing it. And we need this knowledge base. Really, it's really important to understand then where do we have a problem. And there we actually have a problem. I have mentioned this before, right? It's one of my passions, this lack of data. And it's really something I don't know if worried about, but I'm really passionate about this lack of data because people measure. Yeah. But the data is not shared. And this is an issue, right? But it's not that I'm pinpointing, I'm saying you people, because I'm the same. I'm also these people. finally you have finished your measurement campaign, you have found some good results or bad results, and it's so interesting. And then you publish, and then you're like, oh yeah, okay, let's go to the next thing.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And then that data sort of ends up in a graph in a paper that, people can't access, or they have to try and translate it. And that comes with it a whole slew of errors that can, pop up as well, and misinterpretations, not to mention.
Yes, exactly. So the raw data has a lot of value, but we don't have a system right now at least for water quality, for pollution, how we can really harness this and profit from it. And we need it.
I guess the system comes too late, right? Because once you know that something is definitely of concern, that's when the standards get developed. But perhaps they need to be developed way beforehand when you're assessing it in the first place.
Standards like the thresholds?
Yeah, the thresholds.
Yes, I guess thresholds are often, I'm not sure how these thresholds are really developed, but I have the feeling it's often the case that then we notice, oh, this pollutant is occurring a lot. We have really an issue of exposure. And then, oh yeah, now we need to know what is the threshold? How can we get a standard for it? And this is what happens with PFAS around the world. And I don't know about all the other places, but in Switzerland right now we are, but we need actually some threshold for to protect us. But it's always the next step, which makes sense, right? Given there are so many different pollutants. You cannot develop a threshold for everything.
No, you can't. And I guess if you look into the Swiss Water Quality Protection Act, there's plenty of pollutants already listed with different thresholds that you have to maintain as well. So I think what you already have is a big enough challenge to manage and maintain and keep up to date, that adding more, you have to be very good and very confident about them.
Yes, you don't want to add something that you're not sure about. So this is why collecting this monitoring data and this measuring data, making it available so we can have a basis for decision is really, really important.
No, definitely.
Yes. So that is one of my frustrations, the additional frustration that we could learn more if we had more data.
Yeah. So I studied chemistry in high school. Although once we got to organic chemistry, which I think a lot of these micropollutants are sort of touch upon, I think I started losing the plot because I didn't want to see enough C's and O's in my chemical symbols. But maybe you can enlighten me, and we can also sort of shed some light on some other pollutants that you've also covered in your research. One of them in particular, glyphosate, we've also touched upon in the show previously on episode 10. So it's been a while since we've covered different types of pollutants. But then there's mecoprop, Tyre, and diclofenac. And diclofenac, I know, apparently active ingredient of Voltaren gel. So in case you have inflammation on your muscles, you can use that. Very good, very recommended. But I guess has consequences for the environment because it ends up in the wastewater and waterways. But what are the others? Where do they come from?
Yes, I will. First, maybe before I come to the specific pollutants, I would like to enlighten you that also we had chemistry in the university, and I really didn't like it. And I really didn't like and understand the organic chemistry part. And I'm really still an engineer. So I work with these pollutants, yes, but this is really interdisciplinary in the sense that I always work with environmental chemists that actually understand the structure of these pollutants.
Chemists, I admire you.
Yes.
And your patience to deal with these complex structures. I also saw the chemical symbol for PFAS recently, and I literally just almost fainted.
And there are many different ones, but yes. And so, these structures are still a riddle to me too. And I try to the name is very good, right? We understand the name. And that's what you asked about. You asked about Tyre, microprop, glyphosate, and diclofenac. And I know the name. I know what are the sources for the very typical ones. But if you would ask me about the chemical properties and how do they behave, then that's
a much more in-depth.
Yes.
In-depth understanding. Nevertheless,
yes.
Where do they come from?
Yeah, so maybe you mentioned already diclofenac.
Yep.
And that it's used as a pain medication. And where does it come from then? How does it even get to the waterways? And this is maybe what's interesting, right?
Because do tell me.
Yeah, I mean, one part is if you use a shower or even if you go on the toilet, then you will automatically excrete it to the wastewater, to the sewer system. And this is how then, depending on the situation, it will go to the environment and can be toxic. Actually, diclofenac can be quite toxic.
Okay.
So this is why we always look at it, because it can be problematic. And for diuron or microprop, these are pollutants that are used outdoors, mainly, not only. And for example, microprop you use on flat roofs commonly. So you want to prevent that there is growth on your flat roof. And this is often used to prevent this growth. But when people install these sheets to prevent growth, one didn't think about, okay, but there is actually a biocide in there and it washes off with rain and then it can come to our rivers again.
They don't stay on there forever. You can coat the material, but it leaches with time.
It leaches, and then obviously it becomes problematic, although the initial use makes sense. Mm-hmm. And the same is for diuron, which is, for example, also used on building material.
Okay.
And can leach, and it leaches. And is toxic.
Yeah. And glyphosate?
Glyphosate, for example, is one thing I always wanted to measure because it's used a lot in urban areas.
Okay.
However, in discussion with the chemists, it's always a little bit an issue because although it occurs a lot, it needs a special sample preparation.
Okay.
So it's more work.
More involved.
So I modeled it, but I never was able to quantify it in a water sample.
Yeah. And you mentioned that keyword there as well, modeling. So what you didn't measure, you at least considered as part of modeling work that you did. And in a way, this also relates to the data issues that you mentioned before. Modeling of water quality, as far as I understand, has always been a very challenging thing because we can have the best model, but somehow the dynamics sort of eludes us. But it's still useful because you can use models to understand potential hotspots, potential areas of concern. And so how do you see the interplay of modeling and monitoring, data collection?
Monitoring is very limited in the sense that we can only measure few time points and also few locations. And we can learn a lot about the typical occurrence of pollutants and we can try to estimate them for an entire catchment something. But this is very limited just because of these constraints, right? And I think even if the models are really uncertain and we don't know how the pollutants behave, like as you said, the dynamics, like how does it wash off, for example, microprop from a roof, 6 ppt quinone of a tire, where we don't know how this really happens. But the model is still really useful to have a sort of understanding for entire areas. And I think sometimes we tend to not model something if we say, I don't understand the dynamics, the behavior over time, so let's not model it. And this is also one of my, let's say, passions or something that is really important to me, that we think about how can we still model it even if we don't understand everything. Like, for example, we could think about instead of using the dynamics, we use median values, right? Then we are not so bad. Or we use stochastic modeling, for example, or we use the ranges that we could expect. Yeah. And then we get still an information. And optimally, we could then validate the information or what we modeled with some measurements.
Yeah,
but
true.
I have to say, we still lack the data then to validate our models right now. But that's the dream.
I guess you can have the best models in the world, but without the data, you don't know whether it's the best one ultimately. And sometimes, to try and truly validate a model on water quality, we've already discussed the space and time challenges and the trade-offs. You basically can't really. You have to choose one direction to go, right? Space or time.
Yes. It's you will maybe be able to validate some location, but validating everything, I don't know, maybe in the far future. But possibly it's not necessary, right? Because designing mitigation measures or management, for this, maybe you don't know the detailed numbers, but you need to know where could I have a risk, where could I have a hotspot. And this you might be able to cover with your model.
It's a bit like how you described the passive sampling campaigns earlier. You can use the passive samplers, then models as well, to sort of identify broadly where your potential problem spots are, right? I guess you start at a very large level and ultimately if we think of the physics behind it, it all accumulates across space and time to a certain point, treatment plant, or, a certain point in the river. So there is certain logic there. So you could use passive sampling and modeling combinations, one or the other, to then figure out, well, where are my problem spots? And then go in and do more detailed assessments. So I guess, a bit of chicken and egg. People often say you need data to do the modeling. Likewise, you can use modeling first to figure out where to get the data. And it sort of is an iterative approach.
Yes, you're totally right. And we also have a new project actually that wants to explore this further. And it's exactly about this, right? You cannot measure everywhere. Yeah. And you can model everything. And then you need your model to understand where you have to look deeper and then go again and measure deeper. And just like developing a method, how we can do this systematically, or like what should we measure to then improve our model? Yeah. This is a big question. And I think this is how we have to go forward somehow. And sometimes I feel like the models are getting really complex. Like we all try to capture everything, but given the data I've seen in time and space and how dynamic this data is of the water quality, I think, honestly, I don't believe in it. I think we cannot do it like this. We need some simple models.
There are far too many factors influencing how water quality changes. It's not just the physical. It's not just, I guess, the behavioral, whether you're showering and washing off the diclofenac while it's raining outside.
Exactly. That would be something you shouldn't do.
Yeah. So advice to listeners, you want to do your part for the environment and you're using diclofenac, do shower when it's dry.
And do pee when it's dry.
Okay. All good. And so I guess behavioral and then the whole chemistry as well. These pollutants, they undergo changes as they travel from, I guess, the source to the final endpoint, the sink. So,
exactly. And sometimes the transformation products of the original pollutant is even more toxic.
Oh,
yes. So
that has been actually the concerns as to why people then start investigating things like 6-PPD, because as far as I read back in a few months ago when I was looking at it, it was also the byproducts that result from it as it breaks down or as it transforms. So, yeah.
Just when we were discussing, I thought one method that I think could be very useful and that I haven't looked into, but I would really like to, and we haven't really touched upon it, it's effect-based measurements.
Effect-based measurements.
Yeah, so this is what ecotoxicologists develop. So they monitor, instead of measuring all these single pollutants, you use your sample and you do what they call bioassays, biotests. Mm-hmm. So you measure what is the effect of this pollutant on different endpoints. So meaning, honestly, it's not my expertise, but could it be problematic to bacteria? Could it be problematic to a certain effect? Yeah. And then you could think about using this information, like if you take your river measurements, to identify where you have a problem, and it's a little bit independent of which pollutant causes it. Uh-huh. And this is something we are starting to, people use it, yes, and in the urban drainage community, not so much yet, but I think this has future. Can we actually couple these effect-based measurements then with our model outputs, and how much of the effect could we predict? This would be amazing, right?
So understanding the consequences and the specific consequences first, and then going backwards into then figuring out how we then sort of set up the whole system, the whole model.
The model, and then how do we set up our mitigation measures? Where do we have a problem and why do we have a problem and how can we mitigate it? So this is a total other way of thinking. Then we say, maybe it's not the sink, but it's just all the street runoff and we don't care which one. And then at one point, you might still have to find out which pollutant is the biggest issue just to not have it anymore.
Yeah. Very interesting way of looking at it. And sometimes thinking backwards is the way to go, because then you're actually starting from the output that you need to make your decisions, to develop your policies, to set your thresholds.
Yes. So yes, really going from the effect and the impact you have to then define it.
But nevertheless, modeling, measurement, it seems like it's all coming together into one core message, which is we need to understand really what's happening across every aspect holistically. And that's also something that I guess you're advocating for a lot more in the work that you're doing.
If we want to have effective policies, regulations, if we want to improve our systems, let's say we want to have more blue-green spaces, then I think we should base our decision on a holistic, integrated view of the entire system.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I meant with the impact to decide how the system is designed.
Yeah. And holistic views, I mean, I think we try to adopt them more in a more infrastructure viewpoint, but we need to adopt them pretty much across any kind of discipline that you're looking at. And I certainly know when I was studying integrated management of catchments in Switzerland, this dates back to the 1980s, when one of these very detailed studies was performed actually in Airwag's backyard, actually.
True.
Where you looked at if you can understand what's happening during rainfall, what's going into the sewers, and whether you can, leverage the extra capacity of your sewers to try and help the treatment plant better manage the water quality, your overall outcome is much better. And I think we're just expanding our perspectives now because it's not just only on the drainage infrastructure. It's also on behavioral changes. It's also on policy and, management and real-time control as well. So, yeah.
Yes, I mean, you're right. This is a really known topic. It has been researched for so many years, and sometimes it's shocking. Did you say 1980?
I believe it was 1982, where a study was published in German from famous professor here at Airwag, who then looked at it was like a joint project across multiple groups, and they tried to measure or instrument and monitor an entire catchment from the catchment itself, the sewer system and the drainage system, the treatment plant during a wet weather event, and really found that the integrated perspective gave you a much better understanding than trying to focus on the systems in isolation.
It makes sense. And isn't it a little sad? How much is it 43 years ago? And yes, we got further, but now we are still facing the same issue, just maybe for other pollutants groups. But basically, we are still working on this. And I think the goal should be to resolve it once and for all. And then we all do it like this.
Well, I guess there's many dimensions to integrate. As you said, the list of pollutants keeps increasing. So how do you manage that list? And yeah, we've only talked about the monitoring aspects. We've only talked about, understanding how to sort of model that process, but you're also now moving into, especially in your position as group leader at Airwag, into the mitigation of it. In particular, you mentioned this earlier, the study where you're looking at blue-green infrastructures and how they can remove such pollutants. Could you tell me a bit about some of the work there and where you're heading?
Yes, so part of this work has also been modeling work because it's way easier than measuring something again in the system, which will take us a long time. So the first study was an integrated catchment study. And the goal was to estimate how much can we reduce these untreated overflows, so these discharges into receiving waters, by installing blue-green systems, so by basically infiltrating the water. But now we really were interested in how much would it reduce the risk in the river and on an entire catchment space. And it was very interesting. It was a master thesis. Inspiring in a way, because I think we haven't looked at this before, and it showed, oh, great. I mean, if you install a lot of infiltration systems in your entire catchment, then you can reduce, for example, the pollutant load by, I think it was 80%. And then we were like, oh, that's good, right? Just there's many issues in such a model because we don't know how much actually these systems remove of these pollutants. There is no data on it. So we just made some assumptions.
Yep.
And then there is another issue. If you don't remove it and you infiltrate, right, it needs to go somewhere.
The groundwater.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, not so nice.
Not the best.
No, and this is something we don't know. And these systems are designed. This was only a model, right? But these systems are installed, and we have to think about, okay, what happens to these pollutants in such systems?
Yeah.
Do we pollute the groundwater? We don't want that.
And I guess there's this assumption in Switzerland that if you're infiltrating this through, I guess, I don't know how to translate this into English, but it's the upper soil layer, which often has a lot more richness in it. And therefore, processes to remove these pollutants or transform them can take place. If you're infiltrating through that layer, then oftentimes the assumption is that the water will be fine once it reaches the groundwater. But yet another location of uncertainty in water quality management.
Yes, exactly as we said, right? Because there are so many different pollutants.
Yeah.
And this assumption is true for a certain type of pollutant. And for other types of pollutants, we have not much data.
How transferable is that knowledge?
Yes. Yeah. So we need collect more data for which pollutants could be problematic. There is this group of pollutants that I mentioned before that are persistent, mobile, and toxic.
Yeah.
And that means the mobile part, in addition to the other two parts, is concerning, right? If you're mobile, you're maybe not so happy to go to the soil, like this top layer soil. You would be maybe more happy in the water.
Yeah.
So then the groundwater or our water resources are not so happy.
But I guess initial modeling study sort of shows potential promise. And as you said, now you have a chance to then go out and validate it. So I guess is that the topic of future work in this space?
Yes, so the topic is to really measure these pollutants. How do they occur in urban stormwater? Which ones are problematic? And then which ones are removed in typical systems that we install nowadays? And again, there one big box is how do we measure it now? If you want to measure one location, okay, but now you have this really remote distributed system. So we are also looking at passive samplers as a solution to measure the inflow and outflow of such systems. And another question is, for example, if you think about tire wear will probably be removed in these systems. Or tire wear collects already, as you said, on the roadside. But the measurements we did showed that somehow these leachates stay high over the entire event.
And they still get through.
I'm not even talking about the effluent of such systems, just the influent. We have no data on the effluent.
Oh, wow.
Just we see that tire wear leachates, there seem to be an endless dip. We don't have much data right now. So that's also a question we ask, right? If you have tire wear, then leaching all the time, and then maybe it's not removed in a typical system, what happens? But all these things are open questions to research. And then there is also the additional thing about climate change, right? Then we can think about what happens if there are more extreme events. Will it then be worse? The water pollution, for example. This is also something that interests me, and we have done some modeling on it. Again, a model because...
Never a shortage of options to pursue, but definitely exciting times ahead for you, I guess.
Yes, and what we would also like to do, I always forget about these effect-based tools. It could be also really interesting to think about how much of the effect is removed in such infiltration systems, right?
Yep.
Because in the end, what we said, we care about the effect, not the single pollutant. So that I think is also really interesting to look at.
And I look forward to then seeing what comes from the future work that you're producing, particularly in this area, given that I'm very much into the blue-green systems and have also been able to observe that work in Australia where they do lots of water quality studies as well. So the comparison and applicability, particularly in the Swiss context, I think given that we live here will be super interesting to see.
Yes. And I hope, of course, that it will also have in the long term some impact on the policies and how we design these systems, and that we start to really work very interdisciplinary to really design systems that remove these pollutants, but also have all these other functions.
No, definitely. Lena, it's been really nice to reflect on water quality aspects, things that really bring me back to the very start of my research career. But also, I guess, getting a good 101 again from you about how to think about some of these big issues that we face and often overlook because it seems like water quantity is more important, or climate change and extreme events. But, these chronic issues of water quality are just as much important. However, like I do with every guest, I'd love to ask you some questions that I ask all my guests so that listeners can get to learn a lot more about you and the person behind all these innovations. And that word, as I've mentioned, is a key word here. So in your view, what does the word innovation truly mean to you? And how has it shaped the way you approach challenges and opportunities in your work?
I'm quiet because it's such a challenging question. What does innovation mean to me? I think, do you remember when you started your PhD and how you felt?
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, for me too. But I felt like I will change the world. And then they said, remember?
I remember a PhD comic about that too.
Was it? So yeah, maybe it's even that one, a PhD comic. Do you remember how it was? Maybe it's the same I'm thinking about.
Yeah, so it's like in the first panel, it's like, I'm going to change the world, which is at the start of the PhD. And then I think halfway or close to the end, it was like, I look forward to the next coffee break or something.
Oh, okay. It's even worse than my example. So mine was like, there is this, so I wanted to change the world. And I had all this big vision and like really this integrated view on things was one of my big visions. Yeah. And this design for removing things, like as the impact should this make what we decide. And I'm not there, right? But then I had to present my research plan after a year. And by that point, I had read all these PhD comics and all these things. And then there is this image of the world. I don't know if you know it. And then there's a little dent in the outer. Is it the world?
There's a famous graph about what the PhD means in the context of the body of knowledge. Yes, I know which one you're referring to.
Yes, and then there's a tiny, tiny dent. And this is what you are going to contribute. And this is what I have come to realize is innovation for me, that it's frustrating. Not the innovation, but that we will create, and in a lifetime of research, we will create all these little dents. And then maybe it will be a little bigger. But as you said before, it's taken 40 years and we're still doing the same thing. Hello? And
it reminds me of the first flush, because yes, also in 40 years, people then bring it up as the fashion trend or flavor of the week again, every now and then.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I answered the entire question because I don't remember it, but I remember innovation, and this is what innovation means for me, that we always press against these boundaries, and that we, even if there's a high uncertainty, and even if we don't know things, we push and push and push until we get retired and we're like, why are we still doing the same thing?
But these tiny dents, I guess, are still what sort of keeps you going on a day-to-day basis, because you know you can make these dents. And I guess that's why you go for it.
Yes, and that's maybe one of my goals. I really don't like to do things where it doesn't create a dent.
Well, that's a good way of guiding your research and guiding, I guess, what you see as a priority or not. Was there a key moment, book, person, event that completely changed the course of your career or your mindset?
I never wanted to do research, right? That was not my goal, because I wanted to do something that doesn't do only little dents. I wanted to have a real impact in the world. But I was also a person, I still am, that is floating around. I don't have a vision that who I'm going to be tomorrow. I guess tomorrow maybe, but not in 5 years.
Yeah.
So when I finished my studies, I was like, oh, the world is so big and I'm going to have this huge impact. But how can I achieve this, right? And then I went to travel for a year. And then there was one person, she's going to be surprised that I now name her as maybe the one that influenced me. There's different people, but that is Marian Schneider. And, I was traveling, and then she wrote me an email. I'm a teaching coordinator at ETH, and now a person is leaving. Do you want to just come? It's really just an option for 1 or 2 years. And I was thinking about stopping to travel, needing some money, And I thought, 1 or 2 years. Why not? And then I had an interview also with Eberhard Morgenroth. And he was just starting as a professor also at ETH. He was really motivated and asked me, how could we change the courses and the teaching? And so there was Marian that motivated me to come. There was Eberhard. And then I started at ETH as a teaching coordinator. And then it was actually funny because another person just started as a professor. That was Max Maurer. So we had this really nice dynamics of young professors, I would say, that had started. They wanted to change everything. And Marian and I, we were all up for it. Now let's change this teaching. And I think these are actually the 3 probably key people that motivated me, because I really liked them. I really liked that we worked together. I really liked the leadership style of Eberhard and Max. And I had been in engineering companies before as an intern and also in the cantons. I liked it there, but I think these people motivated me to do a PhD.
Sometimes, you meet certain individuals that completely change your perspective about something that you never thought you'd end up doing for quite a long time in your career.
Yes. They can just inspire you by who they are, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess the curiosity they place or they ask you, and the amount of reliance perhaps on your ideas.
Exactly. They really, really listened to the suggestions we had, and I felt like I was heard and appreciated. And I think I'm rather creative. I think, as I said, I like to make dents. And maybe creativity is often not asked for in many positions. And there, I really felt seen. I think I really felt seen maybe for the first time, because actually as a student in my master course and bachelor course, we had a lot of men, but not many women. And I've never felt seen before, like heard in this way. And this is why it really inspired me.
And that's been something you've also been advocating for a lot, the idea of women in science. We've had a few guests that also, I think you've also come across and crossed paths with and worked together with on this.
Yes. So many of my actions since then actually have been motivated by being a role model, or I strive to be a role model in the future. So even like the position I'm in now, I'm a group leader at ERWAG. I was unsure. I said like, yes, I liked the work, but do I really like to publish that much? Do I want to contribute? Is it the impact I want to have on the world? And I have a child, right? It's also a challenge, I guess. It is. And then I said, yeah, but if I'm not doing it, then maybe I can, I miss on this opportunity of also being a role model for others, right? And I really felt this was a big part of my decision to be a role model for others. And it's hard work to be a role model because you don't know how a role model looks at it. But I hope some people can be inspired. For example, I also work 80%, which is very rare, I think, in research. And I'm quite strict on it.
Well, so given your level of productivity, I didn't even notice that. So.
Oh, that's nice. But yes, imagine what I could produce in a normal percentage then. No.
I know, look out.
Yes. So, sorry. Yes. But this is like one part of like, I really take a vacation, like just being a role model. And I think this is important because a lot of women are getting children in this very critical phase, 30 to 40. So this is the phase where you have to find a position, where you have to be super productive. Like I'm not in a permanent position and to get a permanent position. But this is also the phase you might have 2 little kids at home. Mm-hmm. How do you manage? And in research, 80% is not much. No. But as a mother, it's too much.
Yeah.
So there's always trade-offs and you need a lot of support. And we have to say that in Switzerland, it's challenging to have enough support. So this is why I'm very strict on the working hours to enable others to also be able to do it if they have a family.
From what it looks like, you're really setting a very strong example, powerful one as well.
I hope that people will print me on a little badge at one point. No, I'm joking.
We should start selling merchandise on the podcast. We can organize that. If we have enough interest, we'll work that out. I'll get back to you on that. Oh. No, jokes aside, but I guess also in a way passing on the joy and experience you had of encountering role models in your career that helped you make your decisions and take the path that you took, you can now give back to society, to the younger researchers that also seek out role models, particularly women in science.
Yes, this is what I hope for.
And so you've already mentioned the 80% tough schedule, but I guess from your side, what tips and strategies can you offer in terms of time management? So how do you maintain the balance between your professional and personal time?
You should not care too much, I guess. You should care enough. It's not such a good tip, right? You should not care enough. But for me, I think a key element is how much can you leave like things be? So you say, this is what you do at work. Mm-hmm. And then I need to be able to leave it at work and then go home and do my things at home and leave home at home. It's not easy, but being really strict and also protecting this time, like home time is important, but work time is important. So I'm an organizational freak, you could say. And I'm good at it. Hopefully, I feel I'm good at it and I like to organize. It helps. Right. So I plan everything. I have everything very well scheduled. But then like extra things like doing a podcast, this is a challenge, right? Because there is not much space for it.
Definitely appreciate the time.
Yes. But then I didn't read the Q&As because of time constraints. I'm sorry.
Hey, you're doing pretty well.
But yes.
This is some golden advice here. So
yes, no, but for me, it's really... And this has been challenging, right? I don't know if you remember how it was, like, especially in the PhD phase, like emotionally you're so connected to your research that you feel like thinking about it day and night. Yeah. And this stepping back and saying, this is my work, it's important. And this is my home and it's important. This helps me a lot.
I guess not being identified by your work, but by the entirety of who you are, both work, both home, and the people, that you're with, the people you hold dear.
Yes. And then if you have disappointments, which you have, like, think about funding, like how often something gets rejected, right? Saying, okay, this is how the system works. This is how it is. And saying, I'm not my funding. I'm not my proposal. As you said, like really zooming out and saying like always putting a bigger picture. It helps me, but it sounds so easy. It's obviously not.
There's always, challenges, easier said than done. But I guess you have to practice it. You got to stick to it and be disciplined about it. And I guess it comes with time.
It comes with experience and age.
Yeah, I guess it's a muscle you train as well.
Yeah. So
something we have to all remind ourselves of a lot more often than usual.
I think it was an Australian study. I don't know if it exists. I heard it on the radio and it's somehow inspired me because they asked people in old people's home what did they regret not doing. I don't know if you heard about it.
Yeah, there's quite a few of these studies, people's regrets before they die or people's regrets when they've reached a ripe old age.
Yes, and so this one was, they really regretted working so much and spending not enough time with their loved ones. Because if you think about it, for example, a child's life, when do they spend enough time with their parents? It's maybe the first 8-10 years. It's short.
Yeah.
And work is important, but I think I like to think about how will I see my life when I'm in an old people's home, right? And then being aware of the magnitude and the importance of things. I
guess thinking forward to the future you and what kind of situation you might find yourself in, and I guess looking back to the past that you would have had. It's a powerful exercise. I guess it's also a very uncomfortable exercise, but one that I think opens up a lot of your mind and helps remind you of things that are important to you. Yes. Really always thinking about what is really important. Yeah. But rather than looking into the future, let's look into the past. What is your favorite childhood memory? Favorite childhood memory? I can only pick one, right? Yeah, I have to think about it. What is my favorite? Oh, yeah, I know one thing. So it's a series of events maybe, but I always really liked to do something a little, not crazy, but like construct or do something creative in a way. Mm-hmm. And we were living in a house, and next to this house, there was like this old barn. Okay. It had a really high roof. So when you were in this building, it was like, 3 meters. Oh, wow. In there. And when we were maybe around 10, 11, I have 2 siblings, and there were 2 friends that were always with us. I said, let's build this huge hut, but up there, right? 2 meters above the floor. I wanted to really construct this thing. And then we found all this wood and we managed to put it up there. There was even a little window. So we had our own little house. And then, suspended above the floor inside this barn. Yes, but it wasn't really suspended because there was still this stabilizing structure, and we put it on top of it. Okay, yep. Suspended. So that would have been amazing. Yeah. So we used this rafter somehow. You call them rafters? I think they're called rafters, yeah. But we put it only in one part. So to get to this house, you had to balance 2 meters above the ground. Oh, jeez. Yes. And then I was really proud. It took us days to construct it. And then we were like, but is it stable? And my parents said, no, but someone has to now prove it, right? And then my dad, he was always I looked up to him, right? He was the reference. And then he went to check if we constructed it right, if we could actually use it. And then he said, yeah, it's all stable. You did very well. And I was really proud, and it was a big achievement. So and then we obviously played there, and it was a place to hide. I think I have really fond memories of this achievement, building it with your own initiative and then using it really as your space. Yeah, that's really nice, I think. Engineering mindset already in early childhood. Apparently. Structural, apparently, not water. But hey, I was also interested in structural at the start and eventually went into water. So I think there's a trend there. Maybe there's a trend, though I never considered doing anything structural, I think. I guess we have to be more flexible and fluid rather than solid. Yes. What was one of the most challenging situations that you've ever faced in your career to date, and how did you overcome it? I have never faced any challenges. No, that's not true. It's not true at all. In every career, or I assume there are so many challenges.
one that I felt really deeply. I would say that was like one of the biggest challenges that I felt like went deep, like you would not sleep at night because of it. It's maybe now it sounds trivial, but when I started the PhD, this first year was very difficult and also for specific reasons. So in the first year, as we said before, you have all this vision and then you have to break this vision down and you have to come up with something you can do. And somehow I ended up, we have no data on this pollution, so I have to measure it. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up in this situation, but how can I measure it? Because there's only we have 3 auto samplers. And I could not sleep. I was like, how can I resolve this issue? I want to measure multiple sites because I wanted to calibrate my model. So I don't want to measure one location. I want to measure a lot of locations. And this made me struggle so much. Now you think, why wasn't she thinking about passive samplers? But back then, we haven't thought about using passive samplers. And then it came up in discussions. And then I said, maybe passive samplers. And then I had to somehow investigate, would it work? And how to design it. And I'm not so good maybe in design and really like the practical aspects. And it made me not sleep because I didn't know how. And I feel like this is often the issue in the beginning of the PhD, right? Couldn't sleep because I thought I will never design a passive sampler.
And you were thrown into the deep end and you had to, I guess, swim.
Yeah. And I really did. Actually, I believed it wouldn't work. It was challenging. And I was like, then you spend 3 years on this passive sampler and then it doesn't work.
I guess that would always be the lingering worry, whether it's a sample or technology you're designing or a model you're designing, if it just spits out rubbish or just ends up breaking.
It is a worry, especially, I guess, for PhD students, limited amount of time and they focus on something. And in this case, it was specifically maybe bad because I had also written a proposal on it, like to get some funding for the PhD.
Okay.
And it was rejected. The passive samplers were deemed way too risky by the reviewers.
Oh, no.
Yes. So that didn't help my worries. We did it anyways. I had good support. People believed it could work, but the reviewers back then didn't believe in it. It happens to all of us, right?
It does. I guess there's always this doubt, but I guess it makes us more resilient, trains us to figure out how to counteract these arguments. And ultimately, you've published quite a few key papers from that work and are well known for that technology as well.
Yeah, so in the end it worked and it was well worth the risk. And luckily we managed another way to fund it, right? Because it might still be in a drawer somewhere, given the funding request was actually declined because of the high risk. And isn't it a little sad? Because we should do high risk things.
I mean, you need to risk it if you want to advance the knowledge. That's, I think, a very common saying, because otherwise that creativity, as you mentioned, cannot be utilized to its maximum potential. But oftentimes, people are still risk averse when it comes to, investing and funding research. That, I guess, it's a fine balance we have to strike.
Yeah, totally. And we cannot expect that everyone sees the merit and there might have been no merit. It's true, right? We didn't know.
Yeah. But I guess in all those worries and despair, what was the turning point that sort of made you see that this will be okay? Was there a turning point? Or did you just have to sort of sit it out and try to research?
To a certain extent, I feel like you have to sit it out. You have to somehow I had to be able to stand this uncertainty and trust, right? If your advisors or your supervisors say, let's try it anyways, there will be an outcome. We can publish negative results, for example. So for a certain period, I had to stand it. And then you get the first data and you're like, okay, good. Somehow I managed this. Yeah, I think research is a lot about, it takes time and then overcoming these obstacles. And lately I reflected on it and I realized this is an issue we face times and times over again. But now I'm used to it.
A lot more relaxed about it.
Yes. Like these sleepless nights, I don't have them about these things anymore. But back then I thought about quitting because I thought, I will never manage. This is why I think it was the biggest challenge. I really wanted to quit because of this.
You learn to trust the process. I guess learning to trust the process is part of the key learnings of a PhD.
Yeah, you have to trust process. You have to trust that there will be an outcome and a little bit also that maybe a negative result can also be used.
It can also be a positive outcome too, because it means we know not to do that same method again in future.
Though frustrating.
Yeah. Though frustrating. But still, I guess you see the silver lining in many things. Yeah. But you've offered a lot of sage advice so far. And so, as we slowly get to the end of this show, what other advice can you offer to young professionals starting out?
Like starting their PhD, you mean? Yeah.
PhD, career, postdoc, I guess at different stages.
I mean, I feel I said everything that is really important, but for me, it's really like keep believing in yourself and keep believing in the things you do and trust. Like I applied for postdoc funding, for example. Both my funding requests were rejected. Like I got only rejected. And somehow I just resubmitted because I believed that the system obviously is flawed or I don't know. So really this true like belief in pushing and pushing even if you want to do it, right? But you can also not say that everyone that pushes will get the big chance. It's just not true. I think it's also push and believe in yourself, but maybe also recognize this turning point where you say, yeah, but I can also do other things. Like I have always had a fallback strategy, so I will become a yoga teacher.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah, and I think it will make me happy. So, I
did not expect that.
I just think that life can offer you many opportunities and there is not one, not the research is the only one. I'm not sure about the salary of yoga teachers, but I would like to be a yoga teacher.
You can bring the meditation back in and do it more regularly.
I would have time for meditation. I would like travel to the most beautiful places in the world and then do my yoga and then publish it somewhere.
Hey, why not? It's always an alternative career path.
Yes.
I think for all of us.
I would be curious about yours though.
No, I got to think of that. And so, yoga teacher aside, you are in this group leader position. You are doing cutting edge research, but ultimately, what would you like to be remembered for?
I would like to be, I don't know if I want people to remember me in the first place. It's not something I really think about. Like people will not remember, right? I don't need to be remembered for the research I did. No, I don't care so much about this. I want to be remembered by the ones that are really important for me, right? You want to be remembered by the ones you love and that you had an impact on their life. I guess I would like to have an impact that people say, yeah, this was really important advice that she gave me. Or my daughter would say, she was always so important in my life. Now I'm almost nostalgic thinking about her when she's old.
It's a heavy question.
Yeah, it's really in a way sad almost. Like it can be beautiful. Yeah, so I think being important for someone and impacting their lives.
I think it reminds us of what's important to us and how we prioritize our time, much like how you've described it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, not lose ourselves in things that are maybe not so relevant.
Yeah, at the end of the day. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
They can find me in my office day and night.
Oh boy.
No. You can always write me or find me on ResearchGate and also LinkedIn, which is where I mostly communicate with people.
That's great. And we'll definitely put links to that as well as other topics that we've discussed today in the show notes, as well as, tips for becoming yoga teachers as well.
Yes, please contact me if you want to know anything about teaching yoga.
But either way, Lena, it's been lovely to have you on the show. And we've really gone broad and deep on a topic that, in a way, brings me nostalgia because that's how I started my research. But like I do with every guest, I always give my guest the final message. So one last message for listeners to take away from today.
For me, I think a very important message is don't stop being creative and pushing and believing in yourself.
Thank you very much. And that wraps up our enlightening, exciting, and entertaining episode with Lena Mutzner. For more information on different meditative activities, a database of different pollutants around your household and where they end up, or just some insights on sampling techniques, check out the show notes for more information over at peterandbach.com/podcast. And as always, thank you listeners for tuning in to this episode and for your feedback and support. If you are enjoying the show, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this podcast with your family, friends, colleagues, and even fellow yoga teachers. Subscribe or follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, other podcast channels, or follow the LinkedIn group to stay up to date with the latest releases. If you're curious about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website or social media. Head to petermbach.com, my YouTube channel, Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or follow me on X at Peter M. Bach or Instagram at PeterMBach87. Feel free to reach out to me with any feedback or guest suggestions so that I can keep improving this show. The podcast's intro and outro song is called Starsky by Alex Kieran. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to hear how they are tackling the grand challenges.